Going into the NBA season, the expectation for the Phoenix Suns was championship or bust. Like really, there was no way of getting around it. When you have an aging superstar in Kevin Durant who you traded multiple first-round picks to acquire when he was 34 years old at the time and still under a massive contract. This, of course, was after the Phoenix Suns disappointed the prior season in which they got embarrassed on their own home court in Game 7 of the West Semis by the Dallas Mavericks, a series in which they had a 3-2 lead, to then somehow doing the same thing and getting embarrassed in the West Semis in the following season on their own home court, getting blown out this time in Game 6 against the Denver Nuggets. This, of course, happening after they made the in-season trade for Kevin Durant. To then this past offseason, further bolstering their star power by trading for Bradley Beal, effectively giving up any remaining draft capital they had to get him, as well as moving on from their starting point guard and Chris Paul to later being in the 3-team deal that involved Damian Lillard getting moved to Milwaukee, where the Suns moved DeAndre Ayton to the Portland Trail Blazers in exchange for Jusuf Nurkic. All of these moves, all of these transactions for a team that went from being a lottery team after the bubble to going to the NBA Finals the following season, and now doing everything in their power to go all in to ensure they finally get over that hump and win their franchise's first title in its 56 years of existence. It was the definition of a super team, a team with one of the highest championship odds in the preseason, the highest payroll in the NBA. There was no question that it was championship or bust, and the window to win a championship was very small, with Kevin Durant being in his mid-30s. But so far this season, that really hasn't been the case. And while yes, the Phoenix Suns have had their fair share of injuries, most notably to Bradley Beal, who has only played a small portion at the beginning of the season, and Devin Booker, who's missed 9 games already in the early going. But even despite the injuries, which I'll speak to shortly, the Phoenix Suns have truly been the definition of a mid-team, an average team, a team that does not look like a roster that is contending for a title, nor does it even come close to looking like a team that has the capability of making it out of a stacked Western Conference with the rising teams like the Timberwolves, the Thunder, and of course the defending champion Denver Nuggets. But while most will say the Phoenix Suns' early struggles are surprising, and it's concerning whether or not they're even going to be able to turn things around at this point to get to a place to even have home court advantage going into the playoffs, this really shouldn't come as much of a surprise. And really the challenges of this team and their flaws are quite simple when you break down what we have seen thus far, and it's what we'll be talking about further in this video. As always, if you're new to the channel and you like this type of content, then be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a video, and in return I'll be providing more NBA content like this. Now, I know what most people are going to say right off the bat. The reason the Suns haven't looked that great is because of injuries. Once they're healthy, they'll be one of the best teams in the NBA, no question. Well, a few things on that. One, I always hate the injury excuse because while no one wants to see injuries happen to any player, it is part of the game, and every team in every season always has some sort of injuries that inevitably throw off the overall chemistry and cohesion of the roster. But here's the thing. While the Phoenix Suns have been without one of their big three in Bradley Beal, it's not like they've been hit with a season-ending injury to Kevin Durant. And while Devin Booker has missed some time, he's been available playing alongside Kevin Durant for the most part. And you would expect the Suns to be better than they are, even with just Kevin Durant and Devin Booker. Because as good as Beal as a player is, Booker and Kevin Durant are the two best players on this team. They're the superstars, and Bradley Beal's the third option. Outside of Bradley Beal, the team hasn't been hit with that many injuries. And to further add on to Bradley Beal, and him only being in 6 games so far this season, should we really be that surprised? Adrian Wojnarowski said this on the NBA Christmas Day special, that there has been growing frustration in Phoenix, particularly from Kevin Durant, with the lack of help since Beal has been hurt and the Suns gave up a lot to get him, and that they don't have quote-unquote much time. First of all, Kevin Durant needs a reality check because he's arguably had the most help of any superstar throughout his NBA career, going from team to team in the most ideal situations, but we'll save that for now. But honestly, what did the Suns think they were getting with in Bradley Beal? You're talking about a player who, over the course of the last 4 seasons, hasn't been able to play more than 60 games in a year. The last 2 seasons, he suffered 2 significant injuries that had him miss the end of each respective season. He's now 30 years old and a player who has been injury prone since he was 26. Did you really think you were getting prime Bradley Beal, who could put up 30 on a nightly basis and play all 82 games? You really thought a player like Bradley Beal could be relied upon to be available on a nightly basis based on his injury history? Come on now. Like, I get it, injuries are the worst, and the fate of a lot of teams could have gone very differently throughout the course of NBA history had it not been to injuries to some of their key players. But for the Suns to trade a plethora of picks, 6 second-round picks and a handful of first-round pick swaps for a 30-year-old Bradley Beal on a supermax contract with 4 years left on his deal with his injury history, just doesn't make sense. You had to know this was a big gamble, a huge risk, not just taking on Beal as a player, but mortgaging that amount of your future after already handing over a lot of your first-round picks for Kevin Durant, and having these guys locked up under contract for the foreseeable future on max deals. So while yes, I get it, injuries are unfortunate, and yes, the Suns likely would be a little bit better if all their players were healthy, but that's just not the reality to expect that in today's NBA, especially when you're taking on players who are older with a history of injuries. But here's the thing. It's more than just the injuries on why this team has been so average, and it really boils down to the fact that this roster is not well constructed. A very top-heavy team with superstar talent and limited talent down the line with one of the worst bench units in the NBA. Which, I guess, how do you expect to fill out the rest of the roster outside of just handing out a bunch of min deals when 3 players comprise $130 million of your payroll and will be over $160 million 3 years from now? But for the Phoenix Suns, a team that is ripe with offensive firepower on paper with their big 3, just isn't quite the reality in practice, because while there are some games where Kevin Durant, Devin Booker can get hot in a hurry, and then the Suns are easily able to blow out their opponent, on the other side of the token, having too much superstar power, too many egos, and guys who are used to demanding the ball and getting up their shot attempts, it sometimes backfires. And in this case of the Suns, while KD and Book shared their respective shot attempts pretty well and deferred to one another, the fact of the matter is the Suns' offense and the way they are structured as a team does not fit well in today's NBA. In an age of basketball that is heavily predicated on high-octane, high-motion, fast-pace and space offense, the Suns are quite possibly the antithesis of that. The Suns at the time of this recording are 26th in the league in pace. They're 24th in the league in three-point volume and three-point rate, and their overall time of possession is one of the highest in the league because the ball is very sticky when you have one player pounding the ball, playing in isolation, while the rest of the guys stand around and watch. Their overall motion, ball movement, player movement is few and far between, at least relative to what we see with some of the best offensive teams in the NBA. And they turn the ball over at a very high rate despite their veteran experience, 26th in the league in turnover percentage and 23rd in the league in turnovers per game. What's also fascinating to me is that the Suns, simply put, don't get enough shots up in a game. They rely way too much on getting to the foul line, which getting to the line is a good way to generate overall offense, but it slows down the pace of the game. And it's a problem when you're second to last in the NBA in overall field goal attempts. You can't win games consistently in today's NBA when you're struggling to get shots up because you're not moving the ball quickly enough. And here's the thing, it's one thing if your offense is average, which the Suns are currently 15th in the league on offense, but if your defense is top-notch, you're a lockdown team defensively, say like the Minnesota Timberwolves, who are an okay team on offense but elite on defense, you can still be a great team that produces consistent winning. But for the Suns, they're not even above average on defense. 17th in the league in defensive rating, 16th in net rating. They are quite literally the definition of a mid-team in the NBA. And look, it's still relatively early on in the season, only about a third of the way through the year, and I'm sure some will say it's early, they're eventually going to figure things out, especially when they get healthy. They'll make their way up in the standings. But usually by Christmas in an NBA season, we have a pretty good understanding of what a given team is. And for the Suns, while I do think they'll get better and start stringing together some wins, for a team that had championship or bust expectations, to be sitting here at the end of December below 500, currently outside of the play-in in the Western Conference, sitting 11th in the standings, and yes, seeds 4 through 11 are only separated by 3.5 games, but for the Suns, they have a major uphill battle to climb, and we know full well that all the teams currently in front of them aren't suddenly going to go on big losing streaks, barring any unforeseen injuries to major players on the roster, of course. Yes, the Suns are still going to make the playoffs. This notion from NBA fans on Twitter and Reddit that the Suns are going to somehow miss the playoffs is preposterous, but just making the playoffs isn't what this team set out to be. And it isn't good enough considering they have very little to work with for the future in the form of draft capital and young players, and just making the playoffs and seeing an early exit would be a massive failure considering how hard they pushed all of their chips in on this roster. And quite frankly, I really don't see a world in which this team, as currently constructed, can win the NBA championship. Not even close. Let me know what you guys think, though. Do you think the Suns are still considered title favorites? Let me know in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.